On July 26, 1967, 3 black teenagers were laid dead and 9 other people were brutally abused in a raid on the Algiers Motel in Detroit, Michigan. This occurred during the greater 1967 Detroit Riots. The police responded to reports of shots being fired from the motel, and the Detroit Police and National Guard had thought snipers were inside the building. What followed was the shooting and murder of 3 black men and the abuse of several others, including 2 white women who were stripped naked and called nigger lovers by the police. The official story of the Algiers Motel incident has never been fully told and is marred in controversy. This is the story of the Algiers Motel incident. Founded in 1701, Detroit would soon become one of the most important and popular cities in America. The area was settled by French settlers and a military fort was built on the site of the current city. In 1903, industrialist Henry Ford set up the Ford Motor Company in the city, and the world-class status of Detroit being an automotive powerhouse was born. Starting in the 1920s, Detroit's population was just shy of 100,000. At this time, a large wave of African Americans began to make their way northward to escape southern racism and look for better opportunities up north. This is called the Great Migration, and this caused a lot of racial tensions in the area. In 1915, the Ku Klux Klan set up a chapter in Detroit. Following the end of World War II, more African Americans began moving into the city to find work. They were denied housing and good work from the majority white population. In 1943, a riot known as the 1943 Detroit Race Riots occurred, in which 34 people were killed. During the 1950s, many white residents left the inner city for the suburbs. This social issue is known as white flight, and the African American population was forbidden from living within the white community. This caused poor job and living conditions for the black residents. This was common throughout much of the United States at the time. Police would often patrol the black neighborhoods and harass the black residences there. By the 1960s, during the Civil Rights Movement, more African Americans and their white allies began to demand greater autonomy and civil rights. This led to conflicts with the white residences who were opposed to integration. This would cause racial tensions across the country and violence in cities across the nation. By the mid-1960s, race riots began to happen in cities such as Watts in Los Angeles, Philadelphia, and Harlem in New York City. In Detroit in 1967, things were about to get worse. By 1967, 150 race riots had occurred throughout the United States. From cities such as Atlanta to Tampa, Florida, over 85 people had died and the military had to be brought in to quell the riots. This was the first time that federal troops were deployed to cities since the Civil War. Some of the worst riots would happen in Detroit and Newark, New Jersey. Also, some of the mayors of the affected cities encouraged shooting of rioters and looters by the police. The riots would climax further in 1968 with the murder of Martin Luther King Jr. From July 23rd to July 28th of 1967, the Detroit Police Department was sent to shut down an illegal bar known as a blind pig. A blind pig is another term for a speakeasy or an illegal bar. By this time in Detroit, the city was highly segregated between whites and blacks. Police misconduct was rampant and many African Americans felt patronized and talked down to by the officers. In 1967, the Detroit police force was 93% white, despite the 60% of the city's residents being black. The city had also lost jobs to the suburbs and the black unemployment rate was more than double than their white counterparts. By 1967, the black unemployment rate was near 16% compared to 6% for whites. Furthermore, many black citizens were relegated to menial jobs such as waiters and janitors, and even then, many businesses discriminated against blacks. Education and housing discrimination was also a problem. When the police arrived to break up the speakeasy, they expected a bar with few patrons. However, when they arrived, they found a group of 82 revelers. The party was for some returning soldiers from the Vietnam War. The police decided to arrest everyone, but a crowd of onlookers began to assemble and taunt the police. One of the onlookers, William Scott III, later recounted that he had threw a bottle at the cops, thereby starting the riot. By this time, looting and arson had begun. For the next several days, looting, violence, and arson would reign in Detroit. The violence started around 12th Street in the city. The Algiers Motel was a motel located near Virginia Park, a well-to-do Detroit neighborhood. The motel was a black-owned business which was a rarity in the Detroit area. The motel was located just a mile from where the beginning of the riots had happened. The motel was a frequent target for the police, who believed that the motel was an outpost for illegal drugs and prostitution. During the time of the riots, a singing group known as the Dramatics were staying at the motel. The police were protecting buildings nearby when a National Guard member had reported gunshots near the Algiers Motel. As the violence started, there had been rumors of snipers shooting at cops from buildings, so everyone was on edge. Inside the motel, 12 people had taken shelter from the violence. Carl Cooper, age 17, Lee Forsyth, age 20, Michael Clark, age 21, Aubrey Pollard, age 19, Robert Lee Green, age 26, Larry Reed, age 19, Fred Temple, age 18, Roderick Davis, age 21, Charles Moore, in his late 40s, and James Sorter, age 18. In addition to this were two white women named Julie Ann Haso and Karen Malloy, both 18. In a later testimony, Cooper, Clark, Forsyth, Malloy, and Haso were listening to music. Cooper had pulled out a starter pistol and fired blanks out the window. This alerted the police and they stormed the motel. The other patrons hid in the motel's other rooms to avoid the chaos. When the police first entered the building, they shot Carl Cooper, killing him. The police would later say that Cooper was an armed looter. There's a lot of controversy surrounding Cooper's death, and to this day, no one has been brought to justice for Cooper's death. Next, the cops then lined up the other guests up against the wall on the first floor. The officers then took turns hitting and punching the guests numerous times. They threatened to kill them if they did not reveal who had fired the gun. The two white women in the crowd, Julie Ann Haso and Karen Malloy, were singled out specifically, believing that they were having sexual intercourse with black men. They were called nigger lovers and were stripped naked by the officers. There was even a report that the officers sexually assaulted and raped the girls as punishment for perceived interracial sex. This included attacking the woman's vagina and sodomy. Back on the first floor, the officers then placed a knife on the floor and taunted one of the guests to pick it up. The plan was to have one of the guests pick up the knife and then the cops would shoot them and claim self-defense. Some of the officers even staged mock executions in which they took occupants into rooms and pretended to shoot them. Instead, they shot the guns at the ceiling. Aubrey Pollard was taken into a room and killed by Officer Roland August. Pollard was beaten violently by August before being shot. August would later confess to the shooting and claim self-defense for the action. The rifle that August used to shoot Pollard was not a weapon used by law enforcement. As the riots progressed and more reports of gunshots were happening outside the motel, some of the officers left the motel. Back inside the Algiers, the remaining officers then directed the remaining prisoners to leave the motel or they would be shot too. In the ensuing chaos, Fred Temple would be shot and killed. He would be the third and last victim of the massacre. The officer who killed Temple also claimed self-defense for the action. The officers did not notify their superiors of the incident. Following the massacre, misinformation and rumors surrounded the incident. The officers were all tried in court, but none of the officers who took part in the incident were ever held accountable for their actions. This also included a black security guard named Melvin Dismukes. Dismukes was guarding a store near the motel when he was called to the scene. Dismukes was accused of assaulting guests James Sorter and Michael Clark. He was freed on $1,500 bail. Dismukes was cleared in 1968 of all wrongdoing. Also in 1968, author John Hershey wrote a book about the incident in which he gathered interviews from all those who were there. In 2017, American filmmaker Catherine Bigelow directed a movie called Detroit, which is based on the events of the Algiers Motel. British actors John Boyega, William Poulter, and Hannah Murray plays the roles of Melvin Dismukes, a cop named Philip Krause, and Julie Ann Haso, respectively. Haso, who was 68 years old in 2017, provided technical assistance on the film.
It's just you and me. Take a seat. Sit down. Sit down. there, miss? Is everything okay? You're okay then, right?
Don't touch me!
Try to keep calm. What are you doing living here?
It's a hotel, isn't it?
So you're up here for a while? Some, prostitution, maybe?
I'm visiting from Ohio. My father is a judge.
And your father, he knows you're here, right? Living amongst the blacks.
Are there black people here? I didn't notice. I'm colorblind.
Really? What color am I? Blue?
You look yellow to me, sir.
You're working prostitution.
No!
Look at me. You're fucking these black guys, right?
They're kids. What's the matter with you?
I'm trying to protect you. Yes. Stay there.
The movie came out on August 4th, 2017, 50 years after the incident. The brutality of the Algiers Motel is often overshadowed by the other acts of violence during the turbulent 1960s. The motel was demolished in 1978 and is now a greenway.